And so I'm giving you some examples here that impacted Bvu. But at a point in time in Northeast Ohio, a lot of large companies were leaving town. We had more of a middle market. Now that's kind of stabilized more lately, but at a point in time we were dealing with this. So what we had to do at Bvu, because we're business volunteers unlimited, we needed to find a broader base of businesses and start getting introduced to the middle market, which is like companies 50 million to maybe $500 million, something like that. Depends how you define it. And second, if you have a strategy, so we're going to penetrate the middle market, that's our strategy. You have to have imperatives, which are things to get right in order to have your strategy come to life. And so like for us, it would be, who are these businesses? Targeting these folks and just understanding who some of the companies are. And literally in Northeast Ohio, there is a list of 77,000 businesses that have 20 or more employees. So there are thousands of them around town. The next level is the to-do list. Now this gets down to an individual. And it's like, what we needed to do was work with chambers of commerce to introduce the organization. And then you have to have a measure, some metric. With your strategic plan, if you can't measure it, if you don't have a number associated with it, it realistically probably shouldn't be on your strategy, because it's hard to push the organization in a direction unless it's something you can measure. So for us, it's like we would like to visit chambers of commerce once a month to go visit these organizations, introduce what Bvu has to offer. And then is it a priority? Yes, it's an A. And then who's responsible? This, I say director of development. For us, it might be our business membership team at Bvu. So even as we started to do our strategic plan for the Bvu staff, we had to clarify responsibilities, and helping the ability to kind of get it down to one individual is really important. This is kind of crass, but it's almost like one throat to choke within the organization. It's like, who has specific ownership for each of these elements? And that's a question for you. Do you have one name, or as a board, do you have one board committee that has ownership? One of the beautiful things that I saw with our organization, when we did our strategic plan like 2 ago, the board chair got up there and said, this isn't the staff's strategic plan. This is our strategic plan as a board. And they had great ownership for it. And part of that was because of the type of leader he was, but also because they also worked on the plan together. And so that's important. All right. So one thing I'd like to have you do is go into your materials and pull this thing out. It is a long, kind of got it's an 8.5 by 14 sheet of paper. So this is an example of the Bvu strategic plan. And I really like this framework. So this is the second tool we're going to give to you. Everybody got it? 8.5 by 14, purple at the top. And what it says strategic blueprint approved by a board, the Bvu board. This has all those elements that you just saw, that you see on this sheet, where what we wanted to do, for instance, at Bvu, and by the way, we have like 8 pages of this because we have 4 different goals. But it was to maximize our business engagement in supporting nonprofit volunteerism. That was the overall goal of the organization. Then we had strategies. And the strategy Bvu employed in the upper left is this. We used to have a menu that if you're a business and you join Bvu, and our businesses join us, we help them strategize in their volunteer efforts, match people to boards, have them do pro bono consulting, have them do team projects, and set up programs for them like that. But it would pretty much be static. There were 5 membership levels, 5 different price points. Depending on how much you want to do with us, that's what you would do. But what the strategy was, businesses didn't want to have a static membership level. They wanted to say, you know what, we've got 3 people we want to have go through boards, we've got 2 volunteer projects, we don't care about your pro bono program, tell us what that looks like. And we would do an a la carte pricing. And that's what we did 2 strategic plans ago, to be very flexible. And so then we had tactics in putting this together. We had to customize our programming. We had to change our pricing. We looked at some national best practices. And then we also wanted to do some quality checks. And those were some of the tactics we had there. And then you get into the to-do list, the action steps. And so we wanted to set up a scorecard to see how much a la carte stuff we were doing. And we expected about 40 or 50 businesses would do a la carte. In fact, that's about what it was. We benchmarked our efforts, and then also took a look at catalyzing kind of the resources that the businesses were using. And something that's really important is this timing and milestones column. You'll notice that what we did was we didn't try to do everything in the first year of the strategic plan. A lot of strategic plans we see for nonprofits, everyone says, well, we're going to do these 4 things, and we're going to get them all done in year 1. Well, strategic plans usually are 3 years in duration or 5 years in duration, depending on your nonprofit. And you don't want to load it up all in year 1, because number 1, you're not going to do it. You just have too much on your plate. Number 2, you don't want to stress your staff out, and you want to kind of balance it. And so what we try to do when we do strategic planning is have some of these interim milestones. Like if we're going to grow from 100 widgets to 200 widgets, well, at the end of year 1, it might be 120, then maybe it's 150, then it's 200. You have some rate of growth that's reasonable. And so you want to kind of lay that out in your plan. And then you want to have KPIs, is what's called key performance indicators. How are you going to measure whatever you're doing in your strategic plan? So what we would commend you to consider is wherever you are in your strategic planning, have, even if it doesn't look like this, some level of detail like this, because that's what's required in your plan, and try to get it paced out, all right? So we hope that's helpful for you. All right. The other thing that happens is when you do strategic planning, a couple of things are going to change. So continuing kind of with the same discussion. So Bvu, we want to have this middle market expansion. Fine. Well, that's going to change the role of the fundraiser. And like that nonprofit I was talking to at the coffee hour, the person that has to start doing fundraising. If you're going to do fundraising out in the community, that means you're going to have some different roles in development. And so it's going to change somebody's job, or you're going to add jobs. And then you're going to have a to-do list. Like for us, we had to segment the market. We also wanted visibility of the community, so it's going to impact our community relations. And we're going to meet these chambers of commerce at Bvu. The bottom line is at the very bottom of the slide, effectively what you're doing is you're changing the role of your vice president of development, and so the position description of the person should also be changing. It should be very clear. And then the annual goals for the person, where they're going to meet 12 chambers of commerce, that has to be a very specific goal that they would add on in their annual plan. So if you're doing strategy and you're not changing jobs or goals, then my question would be, are you really going to boil down to the individual that has ownership for it? So you're going to want to do that. So one thing you can look at in your document, and as Brian said, you're going to get this electronically, you're going to want to kind of go through that whole analysis of the SWOT, the strategy, the imperatives, the to-do list, and have that available as you're doing strategic planning. So we left a blank template for you, and it's something you can duplicate and use. All right, so that takes me to what we call the Raci Chart. How many of you have ever heard of a Raci Chart? Is anybody? 1, 2, I'll say 3. Okay, we got a few people have heard of these. Well, of course, Andrea has, and Kimberly. They have no choice. I really like this thing. I'm a bit of an HR geek, and I think it's very helpful to have it. What is a Raci Chart? The Raci Chart is the stuff at the bottom. You take a look at an organization, and basically on the left-hand side, you list the processes. And I tried to choose a process that everyone can kind of relate to. It's performance management, like doing annual reviews and evaluations of staff, that type of thing. And what you do, across the top, you put the list of the different people in the organization, like the CEO. In this case, we picked an HR department because they might manage this process. And then also the general management team and HR team and so on. The way this works is you'll list down the left-hand side all of the steps of a process. And what's important here is to know who has ownership for it. So when you're doing strategic planning, very likely you're changing your processes and goals, and it's going to impact people's jobs. So you need to quantify the impact on your staff. So what you would do here, the R is the person who's responsible for that one particular task. The A is their boss, right? They have oversight for the task. The C means someone's consulted. They have input on the task, but they don't execute it. They're consulted on it. And I means they're informed. They get kind of the output of the task or whatever happened in the process, but they're informed, all right? So the most important letters here, the most important letter is the R, who's doing the task. And number 2 is the A, who's responsible. But the C and I are also appropriate. So what we would recommend you do for your processes is just lay out the different steps in your process. And take a look at your staff and have them do the RACI so you know everyone's role in a particular process. And then, if you would like, because this can be a pretty long list of impact, but what will happen after this, there are a couple of ways you can make it a little simpler. You could get rid of the C's and I's. Just have the task listed out with the R's and the A's. Who's the one that executes the task and who's accountable, who's the boss that's on top of it. Or if you even want to go further, and we did this at Bvu, you put in the number of hours it's going to take to do a task. So instead of the R, substitute the R and just put in the number of, or leave the R, but then put in the number of hours it's going to take a person to do a particular task. Because what's very interesting and revealing is you'll take a look at all of your different processes, and then you need to add up the amount of time that your staff is spending on each of these things. And so, for instance, we did it at Bvu, and Roseanne Duiker, who leads our business team, we got done with some changes, and it added up to 2,800 hours. And it's like, well, the normal year is more like 1,900 hours. And so obviously some things had to come off her plate, but somebody else might have 1,300 hours. Okay, boom, they've got some availability to pick things up. By using this type of a picture, you can understand what has changed with your staff and the responsibilities in view of where you're going with your strategic plan. So to help get this implemented, you have to be very realistic with the workloads people have and how much they can accommodate. And this is a very neat tool to be able to do that, okay? All right, SMART goals. Now I know you're all kind of thinking, like, we've heard this a million times, SMART goals. But I wonder how many people really use this idea of when they do goal setting for people. So this is the fourth thing, even though it's very common. But the idea when you set goals is that goals should be specific, they're measurable, as we've been talking about, they're actionable, they're things you can actually do, they're relevant to the strategic plan, and they're time-bound, which is the looking at the time availability. And so this gets to the point, again, that if you can't measure it, it really shouldn't be part of your strategic plan. And that's something I've heard from many consultants over the years. And be realistic about the time frame. And as we said, most plans are usually time frames of 3 or 5 years. And at Bvu, a number of us have been reading a book called Traction, and our last staff retreat talked about this Traction book. Has anyone ever read the book Traction? Okay. We would recommend it to you. It's a simple read, but basically what this author did, took about 20 of the best management principles and slammed it into a book of all the things that you should consider. And I really liked it. One of the things they suggested is, of course, you should have a vision for your organization, something that's aspirational. You may never totally achieve it, but it really inspires people to be active with your nonprofit. You should have a strategic plan, these 3 to 5 year plans. And they had something that's also between those two. It's like a midterm goal of 10 years. And we don't have this at Bvu, but the idea is there some sort of a thing? It's kind of vision-y, but it's out there about 10 years of where you'd like your organization to go. And I found that that was really helpful to kind of have that as something to consider. And the other thing is revenue development. And Julie had talked about this. But when you do these strategic plans, the other thing that I should have had on one of those sheets is resource requirements. In order to achieve the plan, what's that mean for your headcount or your volunteer workforce or the finances required? Because as she said, if you don't have the money, it's not a strategic plan, it's a dream. And you need to be able to be very realistic of what you're going to be able to do from a resource standpoint. Well, when you set goals, you're going to want to be thinking about those very things in here. And one other thought is, I know some organizations ask, you know, should we have stretch goals or should we just have standard goals? Stretch goals are fine. especially if they inspire people. But I think you want to have some realistic goals that push the organization but doesn't break the organization. If you want something that's more stretch, fine. We did that with our strategic plan on some of our consulting revenues. We're not anywhere near our stretch goals, let me tell you. We're just trying to hang in with the regular strategic goals that we have. So, I don't know, maybe it inspired the board to have these stretch goals, but it's something that's kind of out there. But that's okay to have that, but try to have some realistic goals that do push the organization a bit and use kind of the smart tactics. So that's point number 4. All right, performance management and annual reviews. This is the typical thing that with strategic planning at the left, it changes your job descriptions. It changes annual goals for people. We just talked about that. Now you start to evaluate people. And it's interesting. Look at the little line right underneath that, the boxes. There was a study that said basically 50% of executive directors don't get annual reviews in nonprofits. So any of the board members in the audience, if you're not doing annual reviews, shame on you. We should all be doing annual reviews for our executive directors. People want to get some feedback and recognition along the way, and it's very important. Now, some organizations will have the executive director or the staff do a self-assessment, which is fine. They can put down, I remember when I was at Arthur Andersen, we did these things. We called them How Great I Am memos, and you had to sit there and write down all the wonderful things you did year in and year out. I used to hate to do them, but you did them. But you would give it to the partners, and that would give them a basis for the review. But a lot of people don't like that. They want to know that their boss knows what they're doing and is close to them, and that they don't have to do a self-assessment so the boss can then put that into a review. But you know, for board, sometimes you're not quite as close to the executive director, so getting some of the facts down doesn't hurt. Then what you're going to do, you're going to prepare the evaluation, you know, the feedback form, and then you're going to have it documented, and then some nonprofits will have input for compensation. So we're going to talk about each of these different boxes. I would say in terms of nonprofits, most nonprofits, I think this is right, most nonprofits give cost of living adjustments from a compensation standpoint. They tend not to have a lot of variable pay within the organization. Some do, some don't. So we'll talk about some things you might want to think about on the comp standpoint. The other thing is the board really owns the evaluation for the executive director. The executive director owns everybody else's evaluation. All right, so a couple of points on the evaluation. A person should have clear objectives. I remember when I was with the firm, we would end up sitting down in our annual review, and you'd always look at the past year, but then you'd also look at the year coming up. And we were asked to list 5 goals for the year coming up that we were going to be accountable for. We wrote them down. In the next annual review, those 5 goals were sitting right in front of you. You know, and how'd you do against those things? That's actually a good idea to be able to do that, so that the board chair, the executive director, everybody's on the same page of where they're going. And the same for the staff. You want to commit to measuring results. We've talked about that. You want multiple points of view. I learned something from Dr. Roy Church. He was the president of Lorain Community College. Wonderful man, great leader. And he sent out my evaluation for Bvu to every board member. And we have a big board. It's like 40 people. And about 28 people would give feedback. We'd get about 70% would give feedback. And they would fill it out. They'd do the check boxes. They'd write their comments down. And I was curious why he did that, why he didn't just do the executive committee or whatever. And he said, Brian, what I wanted to do is just see if there were any people that were like shooting at you. Is there anybody that was giving any negative feedback, you know, that's out there? So he, as the board chair, could go out and address that with that person. And by the grace of God, that wasn't the case, but it was just interesting. It taught me something about the process from a real wise owl, Roy, who was just an incredible individual. People have high expectations. So the executive director has high expectations of performance, as does your staff, and they want it well executed. And I would say that to prepare a review, it always takes an hour or 2 to prep the evaluation and at least an hour to conduct it. And sometimes in some of the organizations where I'm the board chair, I'll always do the review with with another board member as well as myself, maybe a vice chair, somebody who's kind of coming up the line. So there's multiple touch points. And I think that's great. I remember I had one board chair at Bvu. It was funny, when he was the board chair, he was a person who was doing a lot of business deals all across the country, was constantly traveling. He would do my annual review as he traveled into New York from LaGuardia. So I'd like have these half-hour annual reviews. And he would sit down and he'd go, Brian, you know you're doing great, but let me just tell you the 2 things that you need to improve on. You don't need to hear the good stuff. And he would give me the 2 areas of growth or whatever. My advice for you is not to do that. It was fine to get the feedback, and if you knew this guy, you'd understand. That's just the way he rolled. But I would encourage you to give very positive feedback. Even if someone's having performance issues, you want to incent people. This is a chance to re-recruit people. And you might say, what's this doing in this presentation with making the strategic plan come alive? You need to motivate your leaders and keep them on point on the strategic plan. And this review process is critical. And when I see that number that 50% of EDs don't get reviews, it's like, that just, and I was talking to one executive director in Akron just last week. 7 years they've gone without a review. 7 years. 7. And so for the executive directors, if you're in the audience, you haven't had a review, you should also push it, where you talk to your board chair and say, hey, look, let's get a review. Make it easy for them, right? Give them a list of your accomplishments, hand it over to them so you can help them along the way. But you have some ownership too. But they should really be doing annual reviews. And yeah, that's enough on that slide. Okay, the other thing on the performance appraisal feedback, people want constructive feedback. And I would recommend, no matter how great your executive director is or your staff is, at least have 2 points of recommendations of areas for growth for them. Everybody should be growing somewhere. Everyone wants to grow somewhere. And they want to know that they've got a plan to be able to do that. And we know you have limited resources, you don't have a lot of room, but people still should have a path for growth. So I would challenge you to have at least 2 points that you're recommending for each person in the interview process to grow. Second, career aspirations. You should know what people want to do. Now there's one area that I want to warn you about, and that's you can't promise promotion points. And we do a lot of succession planning at Bvu, and we've done it for some people even in the audience, where you can't promise that a person's going to get promoted, because no matter how well they're doing today, performance can change. Their performance could drop. Some other person could come in who gets the job. And if you said, hey, we're grooming you to be the CEO and looking forward to having you do that at one day, and then it doesn't happen, you have a lawsuit at your doorstep. You've made a commitment to somebody, and you can't take that step. And Andrew and I consult on this all the time, and it's something that you want to be careful about. But you want to understand a person's aspirations, because they may want to leave at some point, or they might want to grow in a certain direction, and you should be able to respond to that. The third thing is that you want input on compensation. So we're going to talk about comp in the next slide. But compensation, if possible, it'd be nice to have a little bit of merit in there, or some spot bonuses, because people really relish financial recognition on that. The other thing I would say about your reviews, it shouldn't be a tell discussion. It should be something where you have a dialogue, where you're going back and forth on performance. And something that I typically do with Bvu is I draft a review, but it's just draft. So if I sit down with the review with Julie or whatever, I'll say, here's my initial input, but I want to know what I'm missing. Are there things you want to put in there, something you don't agree with? Let's talk about it, and then amend it, and then put it in the personnel file, and that's part of their permanent file. But they have participated in the review process, which can be helpful. So the next thing I want to show you, that I hope you like, tool number 5, is the evaluation for a CEO. It's in your packets, so it's 2 pages. I really like this thing. This is the review that's used for me with Bvu. If you think it's too detailed, fine. I can give you examples of shorter reviews. If you want something more complex, we can do that too. But let me tell you, whenever you do an evaluation form, it's never right. It's like one of those things, it's never perfect for anybody. But I can tell you, this is one I found that's in the middle, and people can relate to. And it looks at the CEO's response to the mission, how they're doing supporting their board and managing the board, getting to the programs and what they're doing for public relations and external. And it's got a good gradation that's on there. It's very reasonable. So we offer this to you that if you'd ever like to see it, and as Brian said, you're going to get electronic copies of it, thought this thing might be helpful because we do get these questions and you can see what you think of it. Okay. The other thing I would say, be consistent. Whatever evaluation you have, don't change it. Leave it for 5 years, 6 years, so this executive director knows how they're being evaluated. Everybody gets used to it, plus the board gets used to looking at it. No, there's more. If you look at, there are 4 categories. This, I was just using an example for this slide, Roland. Yeah. All right. Compensation. So the point on compensation, Kimberly, who's in the back, has financial survey data back there. She should be your best friend. I would say that the board once a year should be looking at market data in terms of how you're paying your executive director, and the executive director should be looking at it for how they're paying their staff. So we have this Abbott-Langer survey. It's a thing of beauty. It's a national survey, but it gives you an understanding of how much people are paid for different roles. Now, I know for a fact there may not be much you can do about compensation. At least you should know how far off market you are for each of your different jobs, because you might need to do some catch-ups for some people, especially with unemployment dropping, as it has been. And you should at least understand kind of where you are relative to the market. The other thing I would just mention, bonuses. Most nonprofits don't do bonuses. Only 30% of nonprofits offer bonuses, and that tends to be just for the upper level of the organization. But if you have the ability to do some spot bonuses, like even $100, $200, it really goes a long way. So the main point on this on comp, your evaluation should incent people, should have some impact on comp, and you should know where you are relative to the market. Okay, I'm saving the best for last. These are our 2 last slides. So this gets to what we call a dashboard. How many of you have a dashboard of some kind for your nonprofits? Sorta? Okay. I think everybody should have a dashboard. And this ties into the strategic plan and making your strategic plan come to life. So this is the Bvu Dashboard. We do it once a month, and what we have done with this thing, so I can do this, at the very top, right up there, that's our income statement. It's actually got all the revenue sources, and in the one orange line, it's got the total expenses in one line. What we do is we compare our income statement, kind of where we are year to date, where we thought we were going to be with the budget, with a variance analysis. So right there, you can see exactly how we're doing financially. And then over here, where were we year to date the prior year, and then what's the overall budget for the organization. So you can kind of get a sense of how this year looks compared to what it was last year, and have a sense of what the overall budget is. It's a very short, tight income statement. Then we get into revenue. A third of our revenue, 35%, comes from business memberships. So we look at the number of businesses that we have at any point in time by level with kind of a variance analysis compared to the prior year. What we're always doing is comparing ourselves to where we thought we were going to be at this point in the year and what we did in the prior year. Foundation grants. Where are we year to date? Pulling in foundation grants. Where were we compared to the prior year? And then all this stuff down here are our program results. So we take a look at our services to business, the number of presentations we're doing there. Down here are the number of needs assessments. One thing that Kimberly does in particular is she tries to understand what your needs are in the nonprofits, each of your nonprofits, as far as your board needs, operational needs, and so on. And so we want to make sure we're in touch, and how many touch points have we had, how many nonprofits have we talked to, and we expect to talk to 350, 400 a year. And so we see if we're ahead or behind on that. Board matching, how many board members have we matched at any point in time? How many consults has the Bvu staff done? The number of seminars we've done, the number of attendees, and our communications, how many people are coming to our web. This is a very high-level snapshot of the organization. So what's important about it is this. It is one page, and it kind of captures the essence of what we're doing. We use this thing once a month for the staff, and we use it quarterly for our board. So our board, every board packet has this dashboard. And if they don't look at anything else in our packet, this is the sheet we try to get them to. Now, all of these goals tie into the strategic plan. This is why we're here, is to talk about the strategic plan and making it come alive. If it doesn't tie into your dashboard with this variance analysis and how you're doing, then your board isn't aware of how you're progressing through the process. And and what's important to make this thing work is you have to have the systems and the staff that's able to pull the numbers once a month and have it available so you can do something in this type of a snapshot. But it gives you a good sense, and anything in the variance column that's negative is negative, or negative is negative, and anything that's positive is positive, and that's very easy for everybody to understand. This is about our 10th version of this thing. And when we first did it, it kept changing, because the staff did it, the board got their hands on it. But it doesn't change much anymore, maybe 1 or 2 items. And we've been using this for 14 years, and it works really well for us. All right. This is the other tool that I think you're going to find is extremely valuable. This is something where we look at our strategic planning targets and our kind of a traffic light or over and unders on all of these different things. So let me explain how this thing works. You have 18 KPIs, key performance indicators, down the left-hand side. And it hits all sorts of stuff. It's our businesses, it's our nonprofit services, financial, our quality metrics, all of those types of things. But it's only 18 of them. Again, it fits on one page. Now, what we do with this, we show this to our board, but when we sit down with funders like the Akron Community Foundation, we also use it for them. Because we can show foundations exactly how the organization is doing against our strategy. So on the far left side, we have our baseline of where we were in a particular year. We have what we've done in 17, 18, and what our overall target is for our strategic plan on the right-hand side. Now remember when I mentioned we have interim milestones? Even though the target might be high, 1 year into the plan, we may have an interim milestone in there. It's going to be much less than the target, but that's okay. So how are we doing measuring ourselves against those milestones? And then we put a green, yellow, red on it on that one column. And the other thing is, some people, when they do these things, everything is green. Well, that would tell me they haven't really stretched themselves as an organization. I would encourage you not to have everything be green. Have some reds, have some yellows, push yourself as an organization, and be very honest with your assessment and how you're doing. And the book Traction will tell you that, well, I'll get that in a minute. So this is a really important document. We only do this one twice a year. The dashboard we do once a month. This document we do twice a year and have it available. We do it June 30th, we do it 12/31, and we're a 12/31 organization. So we find that to be extremely helpful. And you can set up your own metrics, whatever's important. But when you go into a funder and they're very honest and say, this is where we are, this is what we've been trying to do, and this is how we're progressing, even if you're not green on everything, they realize you've got a good management structure. And the board should also have some input on this in terms of how you're measuring yourself and your annual targets, all right? So I love this dashboard. I love this KPI document, and would encourage you to do something like that in your process. All right, so the other thing I was going to mention about this book, Traction. They'll tell you of these 20 management approaches, 2 things are the most important right out of the gate. The staff has to understand roles and responsibilities and make sure everybody's very clear of what they're doing. And number 2, one thing that you should do is have what they call 3 to 7 rocks. And what are rocks? Meaning you have your strategic plan, you have your annual plan, but the other thing that can make your strategy come to life is every quarter there should be 3 to 7 things that you are absolutely going to achieve within the organization. Like, it's not debatable. And every staff meeting, the way you start your staff meeting, they recommend you start with successes and headlines, kind of get things off on a positive footing, and then you review your rocks. and you have one owner for each rock that reports on it. It's like, and we have 4 right now at Bvu, and we'll go through every staff meeting, and you're either on track or you're off track. And if you're off track on achieving your rock goal, then that'll be part of the staff discussion. And I love it. It's something that forces these issues, especially strategic issues, to stay front and center in your staff. And then the question for the board is the board doing the same thing? And I realize the board responsibility is a little different, because you might be supporting the staff, or you should be supporting the staff on the strategy. But I would ask you to think about your board agendas. You know, what do your last couple board agendas look like? And are they covering the different strategic plans and getting updates and keeping it front and center? And the other thing is for staff, and I would say CEOs in particular, let's say you have 5 of these rocks. If I asked you at any point in time how you're spending your time, let's take 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Would you agree that at 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon you were spending time on one of the 5 most important things that your nonprofit is focused on strategically? At any point in time, stay on those 5 things. Just be laser focused, and that would help drive the organization. Because the problem is, and I know for myself, I get scattered, and I get things bombarding me. I answer the phone and all that, but I've got to stay laser focused on the 5 most important things. All right. So with that, I think we have a little bit of time for questions. Brian, how are we doing on time? Yep. So, unfortunately, you're going to have to shout with questions, and Julie and I will do our best, and then we'll do a quick wrap-up. Julie.
Kind of a manual for responsibilities of the board on the onboarding process.
Oh.
And if you could suggest some resources and maybe send those with the slides.
Well, we have some great resources for you. Julie.
Yeah, we have lots of resources. If you want to email me, endless resources related to that. We have an example of a board self-assessment. It's less than half the boards do an annual self-assessment. So, and some boards do a scorecard where, you know, you're getting a report out on what the organization says that you've done as a board member, but less frequently is a self-assessment done. So, and then you asked about onboarding and kind of best practices in that. We definitely have resources on what should happen. You should make sure that there's a good orientation for new board members and that they really understand what they're signing up for. Yeah. Why is it important? Absolutely. A periodic review, it's a best practice to kind of really assess what are we doing well, what could we be doing better, both as on an individual basis, so that's self-assessment, and then we do, again, shameless plug, we do board development consulting where we go through an assessment process. And what it does is it gets everybody bought into what you're doing, and it, you know, re-engages, refreshes, renews, you know, your commitment to the organization. So it's absolutely something that's important to make sure. Because every time you bring on new board members or you go through strategic planning or something else changes with your organization, you've got to reset and revive and re-energize the board to be successful. Yeah. And we would say, you know, certainly a commitment to board development, you know, really can enhance the effectiveness of your organization. If you've got a strong board, you know, that board is working for the organization to advance your mission. So.
And I'll even be more specific. I'd say every 3 or 4 years, your board should go through a detailed self-assessment. Some of the best boards that we see do that. And so, for instance, Bvu, this shameless plug, but we do consulting on boards, about 60, 70 organizations a year. Some of those are lighter touch, where we refresh them, remind them what their responsibilities are. In talking to the board chair and the executive director, we find out what are some of the issues, so we make sure we hit that. Or the deeper dive is doing a survey, interviews, kind of a realignment, looking at the board organization design and committees based on strategy and so on. So highly recommend you do that, and even with some frequency. I can't remember the name of the author. Yeah, she was asking the author of the book Traction. I can't remember who the author's right hand, but I'll Google it and find out for you. Yeah, we've got about 5 copies floating around our office. But it's good. Yes. Any other questions? Gino Whitman, okay. Wickman. Okay, thank you. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank God for Google.
Ron Kenneth, South Akron Youth Mentorship. I like this evaluation form for CEOs. I was curious if you guys have any for like director level, coordinator level, any other levels.
The answer is yes. We have some sample evals that you could take a look at. Yes. So maybe Kimberly can help out, or we can reach out. I know I have some.
One of us.
Yeah, we'll just grab one of us. We'll get your email address and find that for you. By the way you should use BVU, there are a couple of different ways. We're funded by the Akron Community Foundation specifically to help you with management assistance. So as you have questions, problems, just give us a call and we will try to help you with things like that. The other thing is we do have consulting services which are subsidized by Akron Community Foundation and GAR, and that's the strategic planning, succession planning for staff. We've done some mergers. We do board consulting, board development that we're talking about. And what's nice in Akron, to a point, there's a subsidy that's available if anyone's ever interested. So please call us on that. Someone else had a question? Yes, please.
You mentioned a survey to assess where the benchmarks are.
Compensation? Yeah, we keep it in our office, so it's available, so you have to come to the office. And see Kimberly over there, because we don't want it walking out. Yeah, we're on South Main. Right, we're in that zone where it's like a war zone with all the construction. We're right in the middle of that. That's where you'll find us. UDS, if you know where the UDS building is, that's where we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Brian. Rich Wilson from Israel Hunger Center. Do you have some advice or words of wisdom for how to scale a strategic plan for a smaller nonprofit as a board, smaller nonprofit?
Yeah, I mean, I would go through the same types of process. You may not be able to afford a consultant necessarily, but that means that more work has to be done and maybe takes a little bit longer time. But when you talk about scaling, the basic ingredients of a strategic plan are the same for all strategic plans. I'll let Julie answer that because you do quite a bit.
Yeah, I would say, you've got a smaller team probably working on it, and as Brian said, based on, just your capacity, it may take a little bit longer. The importance of being realistic, and putting, maybe it's not something, you have fewer things that you get to quickly, and there are a few more items that are further out on your plan, just to be realistic. But the power of a strategic plan, besides, kind of being the guiding star for your organization, is it can really engage current board members and potential board members. People get really excited to see you've got a vision, you've got a plan for where you're trying to take this organization and want to be part of it. So, you can also potentially use it to find some new folks who want to join your cause.
Okay. We'll go ahead and wrap it up.
All right, we're going to take a 10-minute break. So please, if you could reconvene here at about 10:35. Grab some coffee, grab some more food, use the restroom, and again, we'll be back here in about 10 minutes. So thank you.